Good morning. Glad to be back. Have another wonderful day planned for you. Yesterday, we kind of built the foundation. We talked about what is deep thinking, gave some definitions. Now we're going to continue the focus on strategies all day, all strategies all day long. I've split them up into some specific categories. In fact, you can see those categories here. I call them necessary elements. We can call them categories or subjects or content areas. Either one works. Here is a slight change I've made. In planning today, I realized we probably will not get to necessary element number 6, motivation and management. So what I've decided to do is kind of slip some of those ideas in throughout our discussions on the previous elements, a little bit like I did yesterday. I gave you some management topics and ideas that way as yesterday. So today we'll certainly do 3, 4, and 5. We might have some some time for some bonus ideas. As always, I'll give you some time to collaborate, move, talk, and we'll take our breaks and those sorts of things as well. What you'll probably have noticed over the last couple of days is when I give you a group task, I tell you about how much time it should take. You might have noticed I said this should take us about 2 minutes, or this should take us about 4 minutes, or this should take you about 30 seconds. I do that on purpose. I almost always use the word about because I'm not really counting. I'm not up here thinking, okay, it's exactly 3 minutes. What I'm listening for is volume, is really what I'm listening for. And when I hear the volume kind of dip a little bit, that tells me that most groups are ready to go on. So giving your students time limits about how long something should take is a really good management tool, because if you tell your students this should only take you about 30 seconds, that means we've got to kind of jump in and go. If you were to tell your students this process should take about 20 minutes, that means I can kind of take my time. I have some flow. I have a little bit of breathing time. So time limits, whether they're externalized or verbalized, are really good management tools. They just give you an indication about how much time you have to tackle something. Time limits are a really good thing. So let's look at the answers. Number 1, decision or personal. Either one of those words are probably most associated with something that's deep thinking versus critical thinking. Number 2, it's rigor, relationships and relevance before rigor. Number 3, relationships. Number 4, if it's useful, that's utility. So students want to know, how is this actually used in the real world? That's utility. Relatedness has to do with me. And then we jumped off on relatedness into a discussion on relevance, or that was part of that discussion on relevance. Relatedness is, what does it have to do with me? And lastly, interesting and relevant are the last 2 words. Give them something interesting and relevant to think about, and they're much more likely to think about it. If it's boring and irrelevant, no wonder students aren't going to want to have very good discussions about those sorts of things. I want to talk briefly, add another strategy to your toolbox. I hinted at this yesterday, but I do a lot of these. I do a lot of these group discussions or group quizzes. With students, I don't often call them quizzes, because if you say, students, we're going to take a quiz, most students will go to, uh-oh, that's going to be a grade. So sometimes I call them a quick check, I just call them a partner discussion, but what we're actually doing is quizzing yourself. And if you notice, a few minutes ago I said, don't look at your notes, just pull from your memory. What I was really asking you to do is something called retrieval practice. If you're interested in more about that, I'll talk to you later at break. Retrieval practice is a memory tool. Retrieval practice essentially means this. It's a cold call on your mind. Recall what you can recall about something without looking at external information. Because if you review your notes before you take a quiz, you're really relying on short-term memory, not long-term memory. So retrieval practice requires me to pull from long-term memory what I know about something, and then when you follow it up with pretty quick feedback, that's a wonderful tool for learning. In fact, it's better, I hinted at this yesterday, it's better than me just walking you through those, because I could have done this. I could have taken the questions off there, filled in the blank lines, and just say, everybody, if you recall yesterday, we said that the following terms, decision and personal, are more related to deep thinking. The other 2 are critical thinking. I just could have told you this, and in fact, this is what we often do when we start lessons for kids. We say, okay, now remember, yesterday we talked about this, and this. Turn that around, put them into questions, have students do retrieval practice, then give them quick feedback that's better for long-term memory and thinking than just telling them. But don't just take my word for it. Let's actually look at a couple of experts in the field of memory and retrieval practice. Let's start with the guy on the left. That's Dr. Henry Rodiger. If I were to make a list of the top memory researchers in the entire country, he would be on that list. He's a big deal. He does some of the most significant work in human long-term memory. And he says this: whenever he teaches a course, doesn't matter who he's teaching, graduate students, undergraduate students, doesn't matter how long the course is, whether it's a 30-minute class or a 3-hour class, we do at least two things. We write in order to develop understanding. We're going to talk more about writing this afternoon, about the process of writing to develop deep thinking. So we always write, always, always, always write. And he, along with a lot of other people, will say this: doesn't matter what you teach, doesn't matter how you teach it, writing has to be part of your curriculum. If you're a PE teacher, they need to be writing consistently, if not every day, pretty close to it. Because writing is actually the process of creating thought. We'll talk more about that this afternoon. And then we also take some sort of quiz or test, not to put something in the grade book, but to test our knowledge. We're testing our knowledge, getting quick feedback that's better for long-term memory than just being told the same exact thing. And Judy Willis on the right, she's interesting. I hinted at this yesterday that the brain's a bit of a prediction machine. In fact, that's what you just did with this, is you just made predictions. Without looking at your notes to find your right answer, you made a prediction. The word number 3 was pretty clear. I gave you a lot of hints, but you had to make a prediction. Then when you get pretty quick feedback, that's better for your brain than just being told. The reason I really like Judy Willis, if you've not heard of Dr. Willis before, is her story is very interesting. She did it backwards. What I mean by that is you probably have heard stories over the years of someone who went to school, became a teacher, like a high school science teacher, then decided they wanted to go to medical school to become a doctor. You've probably heard of those people. She did it backwards. She first went to medical school, became a doctor, a board-certified neurologist, had a very successful practice in Southern California. Then she decided, you know what I've always really wanted to do was be a teacher. So she put her medical practice on hold, went back and got a master's degree in education and started teaching middle school science. That's weird, right? The only reason I share that part of her story with you is because when she talks, we listen, because she knows kids and she knows brain stuff. She knows memory. She knows what the processes are in the brain for learning. So she says when you put students in a position where they have to predict, they're bought in. Because I could have done this. Speaking of a prediction machine, if I didn't tell you this yesterday, I could have done this. I could have said, welcome everybody, just to get us started with your partners, work on these 5 questions, give you 3 minutes to do it. Then 3 minutes later, I said, okay, welcome back, let's continue. And if I didn't give you the answers, at least one of you would raise your hand and say, wait, go back. So even if you don't love the content as much as I love the content, if you don't know the answer, you can't close that book, and your brain's like, wait, you can't close that chapter in the book. It's like, wait, I need to know. So if you don't do a lot of those kind of partner quizzes, add them to your list of strategies, because they are really, really good tools. All right, by way of a super quick review, here's the model. We're talking about deeper meaning or deeper thinking, because that's when we really get to change attitudes, mindsets, and ultimately behaviors. Critical thinking is good. Literal thinking is good. They're both necessary and important. Our job here is just to focus a little bit more on the deeper stuff, the personal reflections and the changed thinking. And this is the model that I shared with you yesterday as well. Everything from the planning to creating relevant activities and strategies in these categories are what we get to talk about today. As we start, one more thought. Have you ever considered this? This is both a little humorous and a little deep philosophical stuff as well. And one of the things we need to train our students on is just because I have a thought doesn't mean that thought is always accurate, true, or right. Because sometimes our thoughts are based on our feelings, and if we're honest with each other, our feelings are very inaccurate views of reality, right? They don't accurately reflect reality very often, how you feel about something. So just because a child has a thought doesn't mean that thought is deep, doesn't mean it's even very accurate at times. Teaching kids the process of thinking is one of the best things we can do. So there's a big difference between thinking and having a significant thought. Having a significant, or thinking, is actually quite effortful. Having a thought, everyone has thoughts, even though sometimes they're just silly. Next, let's take a look at where we were yesterday. Strategies are the most fun thing we do anyway, so take a look at the strategies. Now, there are 2 on there that we didn't do yesterday. I'll discuss what those are in just a moment. But take a quick preview or review of the strategies we did yesterday. I'm going to double that. We're going to have another full list like that today. And ask yourself, of those strategies, which one or ones, it could be more than one if you like, would you say, those are probably my favorites, or ones that are most likely to be useful in my setting with my children? Just take a look, review, and choose. If you're interested, 2 strategies that we didn't do yesterday, if you really want to write out of them, send me an email and I'll give them to you. They're Team Web and Send a Spy. They're brainstorming activities. So imagine you have a chart paper in the middle of the table with your kids, and they're brainstorming, they're adding ideas. That's a team web. It's like an individual spider diagram, but just done as a team. I often then do Send a Spy along with it. Send a Spy is where you have one member of the group pause what they're doing and then go steal an idea from another group. And I use the word steal very carefully. They're going to go spy on another group, and you train your students this. Spies, real spies in the real world, they don't ever want to get caught. They essentially want to be invisible. So if I'm the spy and I'm going to go spy on this group, I'm not going to put my nose in the middle of the group and say, what are you doing? Where's your ideas? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stand back and look and peek and find an idea that we don't have so I can bring it back. That's what Send a Spy is. It's just a way to gather more ideas. That's really all it is. So if you recall, we're going to do some necessary elements today. The first one is questioning and feedback. I decided to put them together. We could separate them, but I decided to put them together in this particular discussion. And we'll talk tons of strategies for each of those categories. But first, quick 10,000-foot overview, what questioning is and why it matters. A few highlights for you. Number one, you might very well have said, well, not in my classroom. And in all honesty, that's a somewhat old reference. So that reference has been around for a while. I've not seen much research that contradicts that, more recent research anyway. But that particular study defined discussion as student and teacher interaction. Discussion focused on the content, not what are you doing. See, a lot of our discussion with kids is, what should you be doing right now? Right? That's not really a discussion, that's a reprimand. What this really, number one, really points out to us is that we're not having nearly as many discussions as we think. In fact, I'm going to show you another study on the next couple of slides that might blow you away and kind of make you think about this just a little bit differently. Number two is pretty obvious. Number three, we spend a lot of time posing questions, but not a lot of time having kids pose questions back to us and actually engaging in those discussions. A lot of the times we ask rhetorical questions. Questions are just thrown out there and we're not really engaging kids in the process of questioning, but we do it quite a lot. 80% was procedural, 20% was recall. Some of you might have said the other way around. Procedural is, okay, students, once you get your handouts, what do you need to do? Those are procedural. That's not bad. You need procedural questions. You need to gauge whether or not they can follow the process correctly, but that's not the same as gauging their knowledge about something and assessing what they know about something. And we'll talk more about wait time here in just a few moments as well. Regarding that study, I thought that might blow you away a little bit. It blew me away when I first read it. A series of studies on teachers where they asked teachers questionnaires, then they went into these teachers' classrooms and then observed what was actually happening. So first one, how many questions do you think you ask in a 30-minute period? What do you think you ask? And then let me show you what the data said. And they followed up, how many questions do you think your students ask? And then they showed you the follow-up. Yeah, she brought up a good point. On number one, the 50, they lumped all questions together, procedural and recall and thinking questions, they lumped them all together. Teachers usually think, well, I'm only asking questions about the content, but you ask a lot of questions that are procedural. We need to separate those just a little bit and not think that our procedural questions are actually thinking questions. Procedural questions are get yourself in gear and go and do what you're supposed to do. So when it comes to the actual questions, we ask quite a few questions. Most of them actually are procedural or behavioral. We'll put those two in together. The second question I thought was even more interesting. How many questions do you think your students are asking of you? Oh yeah, they ask me a ton of questions. And we're saying in this one they flipped it just a little bit. We're not talking about can I go to the bathroom? Not those kind of questions. We're not focused on questions like what do I do now? We're talking academic questions. And kids really aren't asking us very many academic questions. I think we can reverse that, and in fact, I'll say this. If we allow our students the opportunity to deeply think about something relevant, then they'll ask us a ton of questions. We can also look at effect size research and determine if this stuff actually matters, and we see that it does. particularly metacognitive strategies. I'll share some of those when it comes to the writing process, classroom discussion. All gets us a really nice high effect size. Regarding questioning, a lot of the strategies I'm going to share with you, both regarding questioning and feedback and academic talk and writing, which are the 4 main categories we're going to talk about today, focus on this one essential truth. The deep content knowledge, whatever you know well in life, is built on constant expression. Long-term learning and depth of thinking is really built less on impression and more on expression. Talk briefly a little bit about memory stuff here for just a moment. Whatever you know well in life, just choose something that you say, I know this stuff pretty well. Could be your curriculum, could be a hobby, could be family history. You know something, everybody else looks at you and say, yeah, you know a lot about that. Whatever you know well, you probably know it well, not because you've learned it. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying learning is bad. Not because you spend a lot of time consuming information, reading books, watching videos. You know what you know. The depth of your knowledge is built on expression. When it comes to this brain stuff, I know quite a bit of it. And it's not because I'm smart. Some people say, wow, you're smart. Not really. I have an average IQ. What's built my depth of knowledge in some of this brain stuff, one is an intense passion and interest. I'm just really interested in this stuff. So do I consume stuff? Yeah, I read a lot of books, I listen to a lot of podcasts, I watch a lot of videos, but really what has built my depth of knowledge is I don't shut up. I just don't shut up about this stuff. Anytime you see me, you're going to hear me talk about brain stuff in one form or another. If you were on the video call last night, we talked about brain stuff. I showed you, but I'm always talking about this stuff. My long-term memory on stuff and the depth of thinking about this stuff is really built on the fact that I just talk about this stuff all the time. And if you think about it this way, your content knowledge, let's say if you're a high school math teacher, your content knowledge of high school math was not built on the fact that you went to university and got a degree in math. It's built on the fact that you spent the last dozen years of your life teaching math. You're constantly expressing. So many of the strategies I'm going to share with you really focus on expression and helping our students get it out of themselves. It's less about putting more and more in and more about getting more and more out. The more we allow our students the chance to express and get it out, we can then determine accuracy, we can then give feedback, but it actually deepens their understanding and long-term memory of that thing. It's really about expression. The more I learn about the brain and about learning, more convinced of this than just about anything else. Long-term learning of anything is built on expression more than impression. So now let's connect back to questioning. I'm just going to share with you 4 specific categories or 4 specific characteristics. Then we'll talk some of my favorite questioning strategies. That'll be the last box. The first one on there, this is pretty basic but pretty important, is if nothing else, do this. Start to pre-plan the questions you're going to ask your students. And along the pre-planning, as you spend time planning this lesson, all the experiences you're going to ask, including writing success criteria, you think, what are the questions I'm going to ask? I have to spend some time molding these questions, and I cannot rely on the textbook questions or the curriculum questions, because some of them are just darn lousy, right? In fact, I saw one example, this was years ago, working with, I think it was first graders who were working on the cardinal directions, cardinal points. And one of the questions in the curriculum was, students, what do you know about the word cardinal? Stupid question. It's a bird. It's a football team. Red. The Catholic Church thing. Those don't help me a darn bit. Although that's what the curriculum said, ask students what they know. What you're trying to do then is pull on prior knowledge. Pulling on prior knowledge is important, but those discussions, so you have like this 10-minute discussion with kids about what they know about the word cardinal, and you wasted 10 minutes, because none of it had to do with the actual point. So pre-plan your questions. Don't just rely on the textbook. Some of the textbook questions are fine, but don't assume that they're all going to get you to the point you need to get to. And the textbook doesn't know your kids. You know your kids, not the textbook. The second characteristic is focus on the difference between quizzing and questioning, and it looks like this. Quizzing on the left, questioning on the right. A quiz is something like, students, what do you know about what's a nocturnal animal? And they say, it's a student that stays awake at night, which is actually the correct answer. And you say, good, can you name one? and bat. A student says bat, and you say, wow, this student knows what a nocturnal animal is. That's just quizzing. That's surface level. It's not digging. Part of our job when it comes to questioning is to dig. We'll get into more of that when we talk strategies. But if you compare that to questioning, quizzing on the left, questioning on the right, what is a nocturnal animal? An animal that stays awake at night. Same answer, both accurate. Tell me more about that. Does it have any special characteristics? Well, it doesn't sleep. If you ask the question on the right, then you realize this kid does not know what a nocturnal animal is. But the one on the left looks like it does. It's the same kid. Right? They can name one, but they don't know the characteristics. That tells me I've got to dig just a little bit. That'll be a theme we talk about with questioning strategies coming up here in just a moment. So focus on true questioning. Quizzing is I'm just popping around the room asking really basic level questions. There is a place in our work for quizzing. That's just to make sure do the kids all know the subject we're talking about right now. But it doesn't tell me the depth of our knowledge, nor does it help me uncover any inaccuracies that they might have. So our big takeaway here is the reason we question rather than quiz. Remember, quizzing is that surface stuff. There's a place for the surface stuff, but that's just to make sure your kids are all mentally in the same room. Doesn't tell you depth. The reason we have to question and dig just a little bit is because if we don't, it's easy to assume that we're on the same page. It's too easy to assume because we're blind. I mentioned that yesterday. We're all blind. We're all cursed with knowledge. Because we know something so well, it's easy to forget how hard it is to learn this stuff in the first place. So the blind spot, the curse of knowledge, is just for us to remember that I'm training people who don't know this stuff very well. So this just provides additional evidence and rationale for why we need to do really good, deeper questioning strategies. And I'm going to share with you a couple of my favorites here in just a moment. In fact, that's the next slide, is use specific questioning strategies, and here are a few of my favorite. Now there are probably 100 really good questioning strategies out there, but because of time I just pulled out a couple of my favorites. One of them was that partner quiz that we started with. Just have them do a partner quiz where they're true, false, fill in the blank, multiple choice, partner quiz with each other where they're verbalizing. Because when they have to verbalize it, and if you recall yesterday, I told you that that was one of the rules with the Apple quiz. You have to take a guess, you have to verbalize. I tried to do that at the very beginning to set the stage that we're going to be talking and verbalizing a lot. That's going to happen in our class. So you want to do that somewhat early in the school year, is get kids used to the fact that we're just going to talk a lot. Yeah, I'm going to talk a lot. I'm a teacher. That's what teachers do. But we are going to talk a lot. There's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of you guys doing the work as well. Because the truth is, and I actually have told my middle school kids this occasionally, not every year, but occasionally, I said, the truth is I know this stuff. There's my college degree. It says history degree right there. I know this stuff. My job is not to tell you everything I know. It's for you guys to discover some of these things on your own. So yes, I have to tell you some things, but more importantly, I need you guys to talk about these things. That's a pretty important characteristic. So let's run through these pretty quickly. We'll figure out which ones are the most useful or might be the most useful for you. Wait time. This goes back to Mary Budd Rowe. That was on our list earlier. Mary Budd Rowe, starting in the early 1970s, she was a researcher in Southern California. She was a science researcher initially, a science education researcher. And she would go into classrooms and she would just observe. And she would listen to teachers pose questions to the group and then would just do the tally mark. 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, just to gauge how long there was a gap between the time the teacher ended the question and the time the teacher either answered their own question, because we sometimes do that, or called on a specific student to answer, or a specific student raised their hand and they were called on, or a student blurted out an answer. She was just looking at that gap. What's the gap? And you saw that the gap is very short. It's about a second or less most of the time. I'd pose a question, a kid's hand would immediately shoot up, and I'd call on the kid. That doesn't allow for any think time or wait time by anybody else. So what she did is she did a series of studies and told teachers, all you have to do is wait between 3 and 5 seconds. You pose a question, and you tell the students, I'm going to give you some time to think about this. I want everybody to think about this question, and the teacher poses the question, and what she found is the number of students who participated shot way up. The quality of their answers also shot way up. And there was a slight correlation to increased test scores as well. When we just, I don't mean to sound crude when I say it this way, we just shut up, which is hard to do because if we're honest, we're professional talkers. We're really good at it. We make our living on our voice. If you couldn't talk, it'd be really hard to do your job. So it's, yeah, hold on, let me finish that thought or else it's going to escape and I'll never get it back. Because we're used to there just being auditory sounds in the room, as soon as it's quiet, it's a sense of discomfort, isn't it? It's like that discomfort actually, that disequilibrium from that just few moments of silence can actually be really good. And I'll show you some of my favorite sub-strategies of wait time. A couple of my favorite variations of this. So every teacher on the planet already knows this. I'm preaching to people who say, yeah, I already know that. That's in my book already. But the honest answer is we forget to do it. What's stopping us? And that gets back to something that she brought up earlier, and that is coverage. It's this idea that I've got to go so fast because I've got so much to cover. Truth is, I've got nothing to cover. I've got content standards I need to help my students master, but if I cover a lot of it, it means I often have to reteach anyway. So here are some suggestions. Here are some things that you might want to try. The image that you see on the right, when I was a district level administrator, I printed out about 400 of these and I gave one to every one of our teachers. And I said, put it in your classroom somewhere. It was a little bit bigger than a regular 8.5 sheet of paper. I said, put it in your classroom where you look all the time. If it's by the clock, if it's by your teaching spot, put it somewhere just to constantly remind yourself to just wait. Silence is okay. It's okay for there just to be be right with you. So that is a possibility that might work for some of you. Let me give you the others and then I'll come back to your question, Amy. The next one is do a little bit of narrated wait time with your students. And narrated wait time sounds and looks something like this. You say, students, in just a moment, I'm going to ask you a really important question. I want everybody to really dig in and think about this question because it's really important. It's going to be the central question for the entire lesson today. It's a really important question. In fact, to help us think about this question and not just blurt out an answer when we think about it, everybody's going to do this. Everybody do this with me. This is the international symbol for I'm thinking about it. If you want to, you can kind of do one of these too. Look up at the ceiling. Makes you look smart. So here's your question. Keep doing this. And I'm going to just let it be silent for about 10 seconds and just think about this question. Here's the question. Then I give the question. What I did is I just narrated the whole process. I'm trying to set up the fact that when you have an answer, keep it to yourself. I don't want to be rude about it, but this is a quick reminder that, and sometimes we tell little kids, do this to remind yourself not to blurt out. So I put them in the stance and I'm narrating, helping them understand that it's going to be silent and that's entirely okay. In fact, that's important, so I narrate the process. Poster reminder, that's the poster. And the last one is if you're really kind of brave about it, what you might do is ask a student to tally your time. You just pull them up and you say, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to ask a question. You do the one Mississippi thing in your mind, just do the picket fence tally thing. And you say, I want to know how good I am at this. Is it going to be always 100% accurate? No, but it'll give you a general gauge about here's the question I asked, and you could put like Q1 and 2 seconds, 5 seconds on question 2, and so on. If you're even extra super brave, you could have a colleague come in and do the same thing for you, or an administrator could do that same thing for you. If you're really extra, even super, super brave, you could videotape or audio tape your classroom. In fact, audio tape is probably better than videotape, where you just get your phone, open up the audio record, and press play, or press record, and just record yourself teaching a lesson, just to gauge for this very thing, how am I doing on the wait time. A couple last thoughts about this. You'll see up there at the top it says /think time. In the 1990s, a guy named Robert Stahl from Arizona State University did follow-up studies on Mary Budrow's original research, and he called it think time instead of wait time. His differentiator was the goal is not just to get kids to wait, it's to get them to think. The goal is thinking, not waiting. So he called it think time, and he actually came up with, I think, 7 or 8 different categories of wait time. For example, one of them is wait time 1, where I ask a question, I just wait before I call on a student. Another category is a student asks the teacher a question, and then you wait before you answer the question that the student asked. Another one is teach students to wait on each other. So there's a variety of categories of wait time that you can use for kids. So it works, it's brilliant. If we want them to think deeply about something, we just got to give them time to do that thinking. So that's one of my favorite strategies, is just to remember to wait. If you want them to think deeply about something, we just got to give them time to do it. But I know it's also difficult simply because of coverage and all the stuff we have to do. So my next strategy is to provide both stems and starters. You can look at the screen. I'll give you a moment to soak that screen up and decipher the difference between a stem and a starter. We often see both of these used in the world of EL, right? This is a PSYOP or an EL strategy. That it's actually been a language strategy for years, but we often see it in English language learners. But it works really, really well for all of your students. When you provide a very specific question stem, the ellipses, the 3 dots, just indicate to your kids that you got to fill in the blank. You have to fill it in. But the sentence starters, sometimes called sentence stems, are the same thing, are just how to start the discussion. Here's why it's so important. You'll pose a question, and let's say you'll pose a question, give kids time to think about it, then you say, turn to your partner and discuss. And I hinted at this yesterday, that when I turn to my partner and discuss, all that's really going on in my mind is what I can remember in that moment. And there's a bit of there can be a bit of maybe a short-term memory gap there, or a short-term working memory problem in the first place. So we externalize as many sentence starters as possible so that you say to your students, when you have this discussion, start with this sentence starter. Here are the exact words. Because some kids will actually say this, I don't know what to say. Turn to your partner and have a discussion. I don't know what to say. You say, that's okay, I do. Here's your sentence. This is exactly what you get to say. I think blank because. I think the best example is. I wish, and I'll show you a whole bunch of examples. It is super simple, but it just gets them started. And once they get rolling, then they find that the discussion's a lot easier. It's really helpful for some of your more shy students who just don't know how to get the conversation started. So give them really good question stems. That's part of the planning, pre-planning of the questions, and then give them as many really good sentence starters as possible. Sentence starters, I don't think I gave you an extra list. If you wanted an extra list, see me and I'll send it to you. Or just go on to Google and just do sentence starters and then fill in the grade level that you teach, and you'll find a ton of really good examples out there. So we're doing these pretty quickly. That's a good thing, so we can get on to the next really good strategies. The next one of my favorites is says who. And for this one, I am going to pick on a group. Who do I want to pick on? Probably one of the groups that's sitting right in front, like you had a choice, right? I'll pick on this group over here. If you're a note taker, what goes in the line there is never again be satisfied with the correct answer. Never again be satisfied with a correct answer. And it looks something like this. Usually it's a whole group thing, but sometimes it could be done in a small group as well. This is what I did often, and this is what many teachers do still today. We pose questions to the students. So I call on the first student, I call on Rob, and he gives me a 100% correct answer. And I say, nice job, way to go, you nailed it. Let's keep going. I call on Tom. Tom gives me a 100% correct answer. I say, nice job, Tom, thumbs up, let's keep going. I call on Jeline, and she gives me a 100% incorrect answer. And this is my response. Students, let's pause and think about this for just a moment. You know what I've just done is I've indicated to everyone that Jolene over here is the loser. She's the one who got it wrong, right? Because when they're right, we keep going, put the brakes on. We only stop and think when someone's wrong. Now, I'm generalizing, of course. I'm not suggesting you always do this, but as teachers, I see this quite often. So Tom's right, we keep going. Rob's right, we keep going. Julien's right. I don't say she's wrong, but I kind of indicate it. And then there's that, oh, he never stops talking unless we're wrong, right? Here's how we might adjust that. I call on Rob. Rob gives me a 100% correct answer, and I say, thank you. I appreciate you taking a risk in answering that. Tell me more. Why do you think that? He's right, but I'm still asking him to dig deeper. I'm asking him to justify and clarify and explain. And I say, thank you. By the way, you were right. Then I call on Rob. He also gives me a 100%, or Tom, sorry, a 100% correct answer. And I say, thank you for that answer. I appreciate you taking a risk. Why do you say that? Where have you read that before? Can you think of any citations? For like an older kid, right? And so he's digging. I call on Jeline. I do the same exact thing. Thank you for taking that risk. Tell me more. Why do you think that? My response, my facial expression is everything the same in all of them. Here's why it's so important. Rob was right, but he guessed. He has no idea why he's right, right? Same with Tom. He's just like, have you ever had that in class where the teacher calls on you, he's like, and you guess, and you're like, oh, thank goodness, I was right. I have no idea why they're right. They just happen to guess. And Julene, although she was wrong, she was actually right. She just used the wrong word to describe the right concept. You ever had that before happen? Where somebody calls on you, and you knew the right answer, but you used the wrong word, and you're like, wait a minute, I knew that. She's actually more right than they are. But if I don't dig, I don't know. So says who is not an accusation. I don't look at a child and say, oh yeah, says who. What I do is I say, okay, tell me more. Elaborate, explain, clarify. Say that again in a different way. If you use this strategy, and I encourage you, you probably want to maybe start in a small group setting, whole group setting, because I don't want to embarrass. The goal is never to embarrass a student. But I want to dig, and I tell students this. Tell them very, very clearly. My job is to dig. My job is to see depth of knowledge. That means at times, you're going to give me an answer, and you're going to be right, and I'm still going to ask you more. Me following up and asking you additional follow-up questions doesn't mean you're wrong. If you think you're right, stick to your guns and say, this is what I'm thinking, and this is why. If you answer one of my questions and you're not kind of sure, you say something like, well, I'm not totally sure, but here's what I'm thinking, and we'll just have a discussion. Because my job as a teacher, that's what I tell students, my job as a teacher is not just to gauge whether or not you have the right answer, but it's to determine where next. Where do we go next? And I can't really determine that unless I dig just a little bit. My job is to be a bit of an archaeologist and uncover stuff and figure out where do we go next? What's next for you? One more note about this, why it's so important to tell, I'll be right with you, why it's so important to tell your kids. Because if they don't know this is coming, you have some of your highest achieving students who are always used to being right about everything, and you start to question them, they will break down. They'll like fall down in tears, like, what do you mean I'm right, but you're questioning me? And I also tell parents this. If you have some maybe helicopter parents that are maybe overly sensitive about some things, tell your parents that my job is just to dig. So there might be times when your kid's absolutely right, but I'm going to ask them to explain it differently or dig just a little bit more. I'm asking them to clarify, explain, elaborate, and so on. This strategy, in all honesty, is probably better for older children probably 4th grade on up, maybe 3rd graders, certainly middle school and high school. I'll pause so you can take a look at the process. Let me clarify just a few things. I like this process just because it's a little bit more formal. Most of these things are probably things you already do. It just kind of puts it into an acronym that's easy to remember. So we question, we provide that question, we pre-plan that ahead of time. We remember that after we pose the question, we just give them time to think about it. We're going to become okay with a little bit of silence. That's a good thing. Then I probe. I help students understand that my job is just to dig just a little bit more and probe the depth of accuracy of your answers to make sure that they're not just guessing. Now, accept can be a little bit controversial. I accept every answer, but I have to be careful not to do what many of us do when a student gives an incorrect answer, and that's say good. You ever notice yourself? A student gave an incorrect answer, and you want to encourage them, so you say good. I probably shouldn't be saying good to an incorrect answer. It's probably better off to say, if I have to correct that way, probably just say, no, we're slightly off on that one, but you're close. The word you're thinking about actually starts with an R, right? I'm going to give them a hint. I don't want to affirm or make it seem like it was a good thing that it was a wrong answer. So we accept that students are trying, but I don't want to confirm an incorrect understanding of something. Then I clarify, students do that, and I do that as well, and then we elaborate. What I just like about this process is it's just simple and easy to remember, and I've had some teachers do it as an acronym and put it on their wall for a good reminder for themselves as well. So that comes from the Core 6 book, came out a couple of years ago. And our last strategy is to use a simple one that's really quite powerful, and that's to remember to use analogies. Analogies actually as a really good questioning strategy. It's a really good comparison strategy as well, but analogies are quite sophisticated tools. In fact, they don't often use it anymore, but when I decided I wanted to pursue a doctoral degree, one of the universities I considered applying to asked me to complete the Miller's Analogy Test. Do you remember that thing? Guess what university I did not apply to? I was scared to death of that thing. I found a university that didn't make me do it. That's horrible, isn't it? But the Miller's analogy test was something like a camera is to a cloud as a shoelace is to a what? It's like, what? My mind just, really weird off analogies. And it's looking to see if you can think a little bit different, a little outside the box, make unusual connections, of course. But I bring that up just so that analogies for some kids are kind of scary because they can seem a little bit challenging, but we can stair-step them to think pretty sophisticated, in a pretty sophisticated way. Analogies, here's an analogy for analogies. They're like hangers. In your brain, they're like hangers. So analogy helps your students to say, I understand this, I understand the role of a hanger, and I'm starting to understand this. If this is like this, I kind of understand it. An analogy for analogies is like the hanger that goes in my brain. So the more analogies you use, the better it is for your students, because they have experience in something like, if you can say, fractions are kind of like a soccer game. If they know a soccer game which is divided into sections, a fraction is just a section. Oh, I know what a soccer game is like. Oh, that I can start to get it. It helps me anchor my thinking about something. And once my thinking is anchored in something, then I can go a little bit deeper in my thinking. One of my favorite variations of analogy is to do forced analogy, and these are just some examples. You can do a search or send me an email, and I'll give you even more examples. A forced analogy is one that's not immediately clear. And so sometimes we just ask our students, the concept we just discussed, how might it be like, and you just choose one. Because it forces them to think differently, and when they start to think differently, then you can see where the connections are made, and then when you can go a little bit deeper. So forced analogies are one of my all-time favorites. It's where you're taking two seemingly unlike ideas and smashing them together, and you'll see some just fabulous connections that your kids make along the way. Let's take a look at this image. Actually, let me give you the definition. If you're a note taker, you might want to write this down. Feedback is actionable information. That's all feedback is. It's actionable information. It's information I can take action on. Now let's reference the picture. If feedback is actionable information, if you take a look at this sign is not telling you what to do. It's just giving you information. And that's the key differentiator between feedback, true feedback that actually gets us a really high effect size, and what we often think is feedback. See, we often think feedback is telling someone what to do. This sign isn't telling you what to do. This sign, for example, is not saying, stop, get out, measure the height of your vehicle. If you're over 13 feet, you're going to hit the bridge. Turn around. That's information. That's direction. Now, information and direction are not bad. There are times you need to do that. But true feedback that results in a really high effect size is information that forces the learner or the receiver to do something and to make a decision. In this case, if I'm driving under this sign, I have to think and I have to process and I have to make a decision. If there was a police officer or an authority saying, stop, turn around, you're too tall, I don't have to think about that, I just have to comply and obey. But in this case, I have to stop and think, well, how tall is my truck? Or I have to drive real slow under it, make a decision to slow down and look out to see if I'm going to hit the sign. Feedback is actionable information. In other words, it's information that the receiver takes in and makes a decision on, which is very different than just giving somebody information. We'll differentiate between those two here just a little bit more. A couple of other things you might have noticed is that there's a decent distance between the sign and the bridge. In other words, actionable information needs to happen soon enough so that you have an opportunity to correct your behavior or to turn around. In fact, there's a parking lot to the right where if I am too tall, I can turn around in the parking lot and go back the other way. The bridge or the sign is not 2 inches before the bridge. Or it's not after the bridge. If you hit the sign, you just hit that bridge. By the way, that's called a test. That's what we do in classrooms all the time. You just failed that test. I guess you're not doing very well learning this information. That's information that's too late. So let's dig into this idea just a little bit more of feedback is actionable information, but the key differentiator is it's information that the receiver has to act on. It's not feedback if I don't act on it. Let's actually make a quick bridge to grades, and then I'll have you talk with each other through another short partner quiz. Grades aren't feedback. Grades can be feedback, but imagine you give your students a test, they take the test, you hand back out the test, the first thing they look at is the grade or the percentage at the top of the test. We all do that, it's natural. Then what do students do with that information? If they're most students, not a darn thing. They're either, yay, I did better than I thought, or okay, I did about as good as I thought, or oh, I thought I did better. So I feel an emotion for a moment, and then you tell your students, all right, put that in your folder, let's go on to the next unit. It's not feedback because I don't do anything with the information other than either feel vindicated or feel disappointed. I don't do anything. It's not feedback. It's not a feedback unless I take action. You nailed it. Number one is absolutely true. Number two, that deserves a little bit of a discussion. Let me preface it by saying this. I'm not suggesting written feedback is invaluable or not valuable, unvaluable. What's the right word? I'm not saying it's bad. Me and my big fancy vocabulary. Written feedback is powerful. Verbal feedback is better. Here's why. Here's what Dylan Williams' research found. Verbal feedback is probably better because it's quicker, right? Giving written feedback to students typically takes time. So they produce something, they create something, you have to take a couple of days to take it and grade it and then provide the feedback. Now, giving feedback within a couple of days is better than a couple of weeks, but getting feedback on my progress within a couple of minutes or maybe a half hour or a couple of hours is better than a couple of days. So that's why verbal feedback is probably better, because it typically happens quicker than written feedback. Because by the time I get written feedback on my essay, I've already forgotten all of my thoughts that went into creating that sentence or that paragraph in the first place. It's a little bit far beyond. It's not that it's invaluable, or it's not that it's not valuable. Again, it's just less valuable than right here, right now. That's what matters. Here's another thing that verbal feedback provides, is it allows, especially as children get older, certainly as adults, for the person to read your facial expressions, your tone of voice, and see how it's delivered. Because I could come into your class and say, you did a fabulous job today. We're so lucky to have you. Or I could come in and say, you did a fabulous job today. We're lucky to have you. Which one meets which, right? Right? They're very different communications, same words, very different communication. So verbal feedback allows the receiver to see genuineness, to gauge honesty, and it also probably invokes a two-way conversation. Because then if I give that verbal feedback, I can then respond to the person who's given it to me. It's two-way. It can go back and forth both ways. Number 3 is true, number 4 is true, and number 5 is true. Number 2, 3, 1, 3, 4, and 5, they're all true. It's really about timing. That's a theme you'll see in a lot of the discussions, and as well as a lot of the strategies I'm about to share with you. It's really about giving the timing. If the feedback comes too late, remember, feedback is only feedback that gets a high effect size if it's actionable and I actually do something with it. We do this all the time as teachers. We give kids accurate, actionable information, but we don't require them to do anything. It's not feedback. It's only feedback if kids do. It's only feedback if you actually change something. Let's use a real-world example. You go to the dentist, and the dentist looks at you and says, okay, things are all right, but you need to do more of what? You need to floss more. That's information, and that's actually actionable information. But if I go home and just do what I've always done, it's not feedback. It's information, it's not feedback. It's only feedback if then I make a choice to then go and change some habit that I have at home. I mentioned it's got a pretty high effect size, 0.74. If a 0.4 or so is about a year's worth of growth, we're looking at almost doubling a year's worth of growth, so that's pretty good. One note about this one, then I'll show you the next slide. What I so much appreciate about John Hattie's definition of feedback is he reminds us it does not have to always come from the teacher. It comes what he calls an agent. By the way, feedback can come from a source like an anchor paper or an anchor chart or a model. So feedback doesn't always have to be just my responsibility as the teacher. That's the good news about that one. Here is Susan Brookhart's definition. And the last one from somebody I call the late, great Grant Wiggins, because he passed away a few years ago. The word that you saw in common in all three definitions is it's just information. Feedback is information, but what we're going to see is that it's information that's about me, for me, when I can use it. Timing really matters. But the most important thing, and John Hattie will repeat this on another slide coming up, unless I use the information, it's pointless. It's not actually feedback, it's just more information. In other words, it's just more noise. We have a lot of noise coming at kids, not all that noise they can actually use. If I can use it, it might become feedback. And I'll show you how to do that as well. So we'll also talk about the difference between praise, blame, and advice as well. Praising a child for doing something well, we'll dig into that, is not feedback. Saying good job, not feedback. It might make me feel good. There, I think, is a small place for praise in our classrooms, but it's, okay, good job, okay. I feel good. I like the person who just told me good job, but I don't know what to really do with that. So we'll talk about that as well. To summarize the idea just a little bit, I'll let you look at left-hand column, then right-hand column. Hopefully you get my corny sense of humor. It's all about the journey. If you don't know what I'm talking about, Google "Don't Stop Believing" and you'll know what I'm talking about. It's really, feedback is about this journey from where I am to where maybe I want to be or someone else wants me to be. It's about this bridge or this gap. Because we all have a gap in our life between where we currently are and where maybe we should be, or maybe somebody else wants us to be, or we want to be. There's a gap. How do I bridge that gap? I only bridge that gap by somebody giving me actionable information and saying, if you want to get there, you do this step, you do this step, and you do this step. That's where experts come in at the K-12 level. That's us. We're the experts in helping kids get across that bridge or making that jump. And Dylan William is the one who came up with the questions, how am I going, where am I going, and where to next? That's what feedback answers, is the process of where am I going, how am I going to get there? It's got to be actionable information. But I mentioned this a moment ago, it's not the same as just praising a child. Is there a point for praise? Yes, but you're going to be surprised when you see the effect size coming up here pretty soon. The effect size is pretty darn small for praise. It's not blame. Sometimes we think, well, if I kind of guilt a child or blame them a little bit or point out or criticize, that might then turn. For some people it is. If I criticize someone, for some people, they'll internalize that and say, oh, I should change something about my behavior. But that's really hard to do. When it comes to blame and criticism and guilt trip kind of stuff, what most of your histories will tell you, your own personal experience, is it might work to temporarily change my course, but I almost always go back to the course I was on. At best, these guilt trips get me to temporarily change something. I don't usually change much long term. I can change long term with good feedback and lots of supports, but praise, blame, advice, or praise and blame don't get me there. It's also not advice. Feedback is not, remember to put your name at the top of the paper. Or remember when you're taking the test, remember you need this equation in your brain. That's just telling someone what to do. There is a place for advice in teaching, but advice only requires that I comply and do what I was told to do. And I'll give you another example of that as well. Telling me something to do is good. There are times we need to tell people what to do. But giving me advice about how to change something doesn't necessarily mean it's actionable or that I'm going to take action, even though I could take action. So once again, advice, not necessarily bad. There's times you just need to tell kids what to do. You're taking the state standardized test and you're wandering around and looking kids, and you say, sharpen your pencil, it's not going to show up on the Scantron. You just tell them what to do, right? Because you just don't have the time. That's advice, that's direction. Oh, did I use like a really old reference? Man, I'm showing my age. Anybody else know what a Scantron is? Thank you. All right. Advice is not necessarily bad. There's times you give it. Praise is not necessarily bad, but it's very limited. Feedback is our goal. Feedback's always our goal. One more thing about feedback and why it works. One more kind of nerdy brain thing about why feedback works so well and why it gets us that 7-4 effect size is it's the concept of a rough draft. When you're first exposed to an idea, a concept, a mindset, a strategy, a skill, your brain essentially takes a low-image Polaroid camera picture of it, right? I just said Scantron. Does anybody know what a Polaroid is? Am I way old on that one? Okay, good. Showing my decades here. Think of a good old Polaroid camera. When you use a Polaroid, the benefit of a Polaroid is immediacy. All been replaced by cell phones, of course, now. But the reason you use a Polaroid is because it immediately gives you results. The quality of that image is pretty low. If you compare side by side the same image or the same picture, Polaroid and a produced film, the film is always much, much better. It's crisper, the colors are more bright, you can tell more detail in the film than in the Polaroid. When your brain is first exposed to an idea, a concept, a mindset, a strategy, it essentially takes a rough draft of that. And it's only through the process of feedback, there's some other things, but primarily through the process of feedback that it goes from a Polaroid to a high crisp, high resolution image. Your brain is actually not designed to get it right the first time. Your brain is designed to get the gist of something the first time. That's what a Polaroid is. It just gives you kind of the gist. I can kind of tell what it is. I don't have a ton of detail, I just kind of tell what it is. I get the gist of it. It rarely gets it right because your brain's not really designed for depth immediately. Depth comes from long-term exposure over and over and over again. When I'm first exposed to something, I don't get it. I get kind of it. I get the gist of it. But feedback allows me to go from a low resolution to a more high resolution image, and you see the conditions on there, including relevance and feedback and so forth. So I skipped ahead a couple of slides. If you would do me a favor, find that slide in your handouts. What number are we looking at? 137? 197. We've done 197 slides? Wow. And we're not even done. Yeah, we have skipped some. Oh, a side note, talk about management. You'll notice a couple of times we've come back from a break or back from an activity like that, and I've asked you to find what slide we're on. I already know what slide we're on. I asked you in order to refocus your attention. It's the only reason I'm asking you to say, what slide are we on right now? I knew we were on slide 197. It says it right there. I do that with students as well because there are times that you just want them to refocus back on the task. That's just a simple, easy way to be right and get back on task. So quick note before we talk strategies, and we'll do the next half hour before lunch, just some of my favorite feedback strategies. This is an absolute issue for every teacher out there. I'm not discounting this issue. It's about where do I find time. Bryan's going to show me a whole bunch of strategies, but holy cow, where do I find the time to do all these? I don't know. I don't know your specific, that sounded like a disregard of the question. I don't know your specific setting, but I do know this. If my job is to result in learning, meaning my job is to get my kids to learn stuff, feedback results in learning. How do I get my kids to learn stuff? I got to give them feedback. So I have to adjust something. Sometimes I just have to let something go. Here's one of the problems, and we use this analogy with teachers all the time, is we talk about your plate. There's so much on your plate. Some of the things on your plate are there by your choice, not because somebody else is telling you to. As administrators, because I was an administrator for many, many years, we have to be better at not putting too much on your plate. But the truth is, as teachers, we also have to look back at our own lives and say, there's stuff on my plate that I want there. And that's okay. There's stuff that you do because you're passionate about it, you love it, it's your pet project, whatever it is. But I have to say, okay, not everything on my plate is stuff other people have put there. So I then just have to balance everything and say, I might need to adjust or move things around just a little bit to find time for something that we know causes learning. Feedback is it. Here are my favorite strategies. Here's number one. If you're a note taker, the blank line on there is the word control. I'll tell you what that means here in a moment. The word is control. Here's the scenario. My students do a project. I grade the project according to the rubric. I give written feedback. I've, of course, given verbal feedback along the way as well. But it's time to hand back the final grades according to the rubric for this project. So I hand it back to the students. Here's what many teachers do. They hand back the project and say, Jamie, nice job, I'm proud of you. Amy, nice job, I'm proud of you. Terry, you did pretty good. I think we can do a little bit better. I'm telling you what I think as I'm handing you back your grades. Good job, study a little bit more next time, okay, you're all right. Yeah, you got a B, that's what I expected, right? We're telling them what we think as we hand back the grades. Can we ever totally get away from that? I don't know. Here's maybe a better way to approach it. Is I hand back those projects, I have the students look at it, and I say, students, I want us to think for just a moment. Why do we do it right when we hand back tests and grades? Because that's when they're totally attentive. When you hand back their grades, you have 100% attention in your class. There's very few other times you have 100% attention because they're totally into it because they want to know how they did. So I then asked the students, I want us to just reflect on this task, on this project for just a moment. I want you to ask yourself, what got you that grade? What was the outcome? So what got you that grade? What got you that result? Was it a result of a strategy that you used? Was it a study strategy? Did you use your study buddy? Did you use the study guide that I provided? What do you think got you that grade? Was it a specific strategy? A strategy is something that you do. For example, if you studied the night before the test, do you think that helped? Do you think that's what partially got you the grade? Or maybe was it the effort you put into it? By the way, I'm not telling kids whether I think they put a lot of effort, a little effort, or medium effort. I'm withholding my judgment. That's the key here. Was it your effort that got you that result? I'm not looking at a kid and saying, you failed, I know you didn't study last night. You put in zero effort, that's why you failed. That's my opinion. Doesn't really matter my opinion, matters the kid's opinion. Or was it your attitude? Did you have a great attitude, a medium attitude, a lousy attitude? What do you think? Was your attitude in any way a reflection of the outcome? Or was it a combination of all three? It could be a combination of two or three together. What got you that result? The students are the ones who need to do that analysis, not me. And see, as soon as I do the analysis and say, nice job on your project, I'm proud of you, your analysis goes out the window because you don't have to, because you know you made the teacher happy. What I might do is, as I'm handing out those projects, and I hand that back and I ask this child to do the analysis, what got you that result? Was it S, was it E, was it A, was it a combination of those together? Then I ask the child their opinion. Then I might say, you know what, I think you're right on that. Or I might say, have you considered this as well? Then we can have a discussion, but the child's the one who's doing all that analysis. So SEA, one of my all-time favorite methods of feedback because it forces the child to do the analysis rather than the teacher doing the analysis. This one comes from my friend and colleague, Leanne Nicholson. She just adds an L onto it. And she says one thing we can do is backward track to the learning target or the goal or the objective. We can also analyze the result, the S, the E, or the A, as well as the goal that we started with in the first place. So that's another thing I can go back and do that backwards analysis on, is you analyze what the result was as compared to what the learning target asked for us to get the result. So Leanne just adds the L on there and calls it SEAL. I suggested this earlier, that good job vague praise doesn't get us a very high effect size. Your job with your partners, this will only take you about 15 to 20 seconds. What do you think that is? What do you think is the effect size, the point number of good job? Drum roll, please. Your answer is 0.14. Is it positive? Yes. Does it move us? No. In fact, I heard John Hattie say it this way. Vague praise, like saying good job, doesn't move the needle. He said it this way. Imagine you're across the room from two people. You're about this far away, so let's say that's 15 to 20 feet away from two people. Two people standing against that wall. One person is 6 feet tall, the other one is 5'11". From this far away, can you tell which one is which? No. Probably not. If you looked real hard, maybe. But in other words, that's such a minuscule difference, it doesn't make a difference. 0.14 doesn't move the needle for us. Something like at the bottom is what we call attribution. It's feedback with attribution. In other words, I have this information that I've acted on, that I've thought about, and someone else helps me attribute that to something. That's what SEA, by the way, is. SEA is attribution. What do you attribute that success or that failure to? That attribution has a 1.42 effect size. You won't find many things with higher than a 1.42 effect size. 0.4 to 0.5 is about a year's worth of growth. So a 1.42 is about 3 years worth of growth. Pretty darn close to it. When we help students attribute their effort towards something that was under their control, we see amazing things happen because it's about giving it back to students. Now let's talk strategies in the next couple of minutes for these different categories. First off, I'm not going to talk about the first one, because as teachers, you're probably already pretty good at the me to the individual kid stuff. In fact, that's probably what excites you most about the profession, is when you can sit down with a kid and just guide them along the way. You're probably already pretty darn skilled at doing that. So I'm not going to give you any more. SEAL, SEAL is a way to do the teacher-to-student feedback. But if you recall, John Hattie pointed out that agents can provide feedback. Sometimes the agent is a source. Sometimes the other agent is the student provides information to us, or they provide it to themselves, or they do a student-to-student. So I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite for those, the second through the fifth categories on the list. Here's the first one. Student-to-student feedback. This is most often done with a product, like a written essay or a project. It could also be done sometimes with a presentation. But you put students in pairs or in trios, and you just teach them the process of I noticed and I wondered. What you'll notice on that with I noticed and I wondered, they're not valuative. Don't train kids to say, this is really good, this is really bad. Because that's a conclusion, and they might be wrong. Some kid might look at it, maybe they're a little bit lazy, and you ask kids to compare each other's essays for punctuation, and the kid reads it and says, oh, it looks good to me. And there are so many punctuation errors in there you can't even count them. So ask them to do less quality, less right, wrong, good versus bad, and just say, here's what I noticed, here's what I wondered. I noticed, for example, you might say, I noticed every sentence started with the word the. I'm not saying to that kid, that's bad, you should change it, because that's maybe the teacher's job. But then when a student sees that feedback, it's just information. Then you train the student, the information that your partner wondered about, what might you need to do about that? Or I wondered why there were no transition statements between the paragraphs. Or I wonder why you used an exclamation mark instead of a period. I wondered, just things I wondered. Again, they're not judgment oriented. They're just saying, here's what I noticed, here's what I wondered, and you give it back to the student, and then they have to grapple with it. And then you see the variations on the top there as well. Now, the wish one and the warm and cold, more or less, those can be a little judgmental oriented, meaning a child might say, I wish you would describe this character a little bit better. I would have liked to see more descriptive words with this person's character. But again, it's less, I think you're doing a good job, you'll get an A, or you're doing a bad job. So you see variations of them right there. So just train students on how to give feedback to each other. Just once again, train them that I'm going to give you information that when you get it back, you need to grapple with it and do something with it. Don't just receive it and do something with it. Regarding source to student feedbacks, one of my favorites is something along the lines of a traffic light process. Often used with anchor papers, projects, models, rubrics. All of those are external sources. So what we do sometimes is we say, you're going to create this project. Your project is going to be judged by this rubric over here. And consistently, I'm going to ask you how you're doing on the external expectations. Gauge yourself. If the rubric says this is where I should be, where am I? I'm the one who has to do all that thinking. If the rubric only comes out as we're grading it for the kids, I think we're misusing it. Sometimes what we do is we start a project and we say, students, the end project is going to be graded with this rubric. Let me tell you what's on the rubric. And then they don't see it again until the project's graded. Given to them first and often. I'll add that to that. Give them to it first and often just say back, here's our anchor, here's our model, here's our expectation, here's our rubric. That's what the end should look like. How are you doing? How are you doing? How are you doing? The traffic light process goes along with with me as I'm grappling with comparing my work to the anchor or my work to the rubric. Train students to do something along the lines of a red, yellow, and green light. A red light would be, as I'm processing where I am to where I should be, I'm going to process this as red, meaning teacher, come give me help, I'm stuck, I don't know what to do next. A yellow might be, teacher, come see me when you get a chance. I'm kind of making okay progress, but I have some questions. I can still slowly proceed. Green is, I'm making good progress, I probably don't need your help right now. Train students to make some sort of their own value judgment on that. about where they are going towards that end result. So the next category, we're talking student to student, do something variation, just one example. There's a lot of other strategies you could use, of course. That's one of my favorites. Source to student is train students that they can go to some sort of external source to get the feedback. It doesn't always have to be a person. I can compare my work to some sort of model or example. The next one is something we talked about yesterday, so I won't go in depth to it again, but just remember to do course evaluations, because that's them giving you feedback about stuff that's happening in the class. And then when they see you act on it, you're then modeling really good things for kids. If I didn't say this yesterday, when you get that feedback from kids, you look at it and tell yourself it's probably not personal. Meaning if you got some low ratings in something, unless you're a jerk, it's probably not personal. By the way, the teachers that are jerks will never do a course evaluation anyway, right? Because they know what's coming. What I do is I try to say, what can I learn from this data so that I can model, not only improve, so I can model good things for my students as well. And of course, humility is a good thing. And we talked about the other ones on there. There was another example. I think there might be some different examples of statements on this one than I provided yesterday. But you have that one in your handouts too. All right, the next category is student to self, and I'll give you several variations of this because I think this is one of the most powerful. Teacher to student matters, student to self matters quite a bit as well. Take a look. This is just my favorite, one of my favorite. In the process, either after they've created something or in the process of it, give them specific sentence starters to analyze how things are going. It's feedback. I have to act, I have to do, I have to analyze, I have to dig just a little bit deeper. Here are some of my favorite reflections. If it's an essay they wrote, if it's a project they created, these don't typically work as well for just a test. That's just right, wrong, true, false, multiple choice, fill in the blank type of test. These don't work quite as well, although I will show you something that works better for that. So it provides students an opportunity to do lots of self-reflection in writing, and after lunch we'll talk about the power of writing as well. Similar to that, here's one of my favorites. I'll let you preview it first, then I'll walk you through the process. I did say this earlier. When you hand back the results of the assessment, whether it's a test or a project or an essay, once you've handed those back, you have everyone's full attention. Because everybody wants to know how they did. Even if they didn't study for it, if they don't really care that much about the grades, they're going to at least look at it. I've got their attention. So walk them through some sort of process. Most of the time, we say, here's your paper, put it in your binders, or tabulate your scores and put it away. And then we go on to something else. Use that time because it's really focused, high attention time. As you're looking at the results of the data that you've gotten from this project or from this assignment, prepare some prompts, prepare some commonalities, things that you saw in the data. Prepare some things you might want to talk about. Then hand back, explain the importance and the power of just reviewing before we go on. What we don't want to do, I think I did talk about this. Yeah, we talked about it yesterday. The teach, test, move, or did we? Did we talk about teach, test, move on? I don't know if I talked about that. My brain goes in so many places, forgive me. What most of us do in teaching, I generalize too much, forgive me on that. What many of us do, probably the way your high school teacher, in other words, did things, is they taught you something, they tested you on that something, they moved on to the entire new something. In fact, that was college. Okay? The goal with teach, test, move on is that once I teach it, and once I test on it and you've mastered according to my test and I move on, you're going to keep the information that you just mastered as we move on to the new one. Truth is, if we don't review consistently, we forget. Our brain's designed to forget stuff. So we use this time in reviewing the results in order to help me do more of that transition to the next phase. I review the results, give them time to think, then I give them time to, if it's appropriate, and I would say why isn't it appropriate? I would say if you find a glaring mistake in there and you say, I knew this, I don't know what I was thinking, but I actually know that, find your errors and fix them. And I'll update your grade. In fact, I do this with my own students. It prompted me a couple of years ago after I read this post. This is a math guy all over Twitter and X. If you've not seen him before, he's pretty interesting. But this is what he said during the pandemic time. I'm going to hand back your tests. We're going to look at where the mistakes you made. You're going to correct the mistakes, and I'll update your grade. Now, he was in the middle of the pandemic, so I don't want to provide additional stress, because the goal of grades should reflect learning. right? So if a child is willing to update their learning, why wouldn't I update their grade? And at the university level now, I'm one of the few university professors who do this. When I hand back a project, first of all, I never give tests. In any of my classes, I don't give traditional tests. I don't believe they're very useful in giving us good information about learning. So I don't give tests, true, false, multiple choice essay. I have them write, I just don't have them do tests. But I have them do a lot of projects, I have them write a lot, I have them do stuff and present stuff. So when I grade it according to the rubric and I hand back their grade, I tell them this. This is undergraduate and graduate as well. If you'd like to redo it for a better grade, you're welcome to do that. And you can do it as many times as you want. I've had students resubmit 3 times before they got the grade they wanted on a particular assignment. Because sometimes we hand back an assignment and the child or the student looks at it, it's like, oh, I guess I totally misunderstood the focus of that assignment. I was thinking it was supposed to be that. And then as a teacher, I have to say, well, maybe I own part of that. Maybe it's my directions weren't entirely clear, even though the rubric was there, right? So I tell my students, if you don't like the grade you got on something and you want to redo it, here's the process. Within about 3 or 4 days of me handing it back, you come to me, we have to have a conversation. If it's an online class, it's an email. And you say, I'd like to update, I'd like to redo this assignment and resubmit. We talk, we negotiate, I give them a new deadline, and then they resubmit. Because my belief is that the process, the goal is learning. The goal is not grading. The goal is not just to grade stuff. The goal is to help my students learn. So if they're willing to invest additional time to redo the assignment to result in better learning, why wouldn't I update their grades? There's an exception to that. Of course, they can't redo their final project because then the grade is over. The course is over and it's ended. But 95% of the assignments they do, they can redo anytime they want.